This lesson involves writing equations of lines, and these lines, when you look at the problems, they're going to have the words parallel and perpendicular. And so there are a couple of things you need to know, you need to review before we can continue looking at these problems. The first thing you need to know is what is point-slope form. So we had this in a previous lesson or lessons. There were several that involved point-slope form. And so remember, point-slope form says this: if you know a point on the line, and let's say x1, y1 is a point on the line, and if you know the slope of the line, so you have to know this, and you have to know the slope of the line. All right, so these slope of the line. So these are things you have to know. Then you can write, given this information, then you can write the point slope form of that line. And so it is y minus the y1, so that y coordinate of your point, equals the slope, m, times, in parentheses, x minus x1, so the x coordinate of your point. Okay? So that's point slope form. Then another form you need to remember is slope-intercept form. All right, so slope-intercept form. And so slope-intercept form says this: if you know the slope, so you must know the slope of the line, and we'll denote it as m, okay? And if you know the y-intercept, where the graph crosses the y-axis, we'll denote that as b, then given those two pieces of information, you can write for that line, you can write the equation as y equals mx plus b. Okay? Now, one other thing you have to know for this lesson. Now, there's something called the standard form of the equation of a line. All right, so the standard form of the equation of a line. And this is what it says. Okay, so you can write any equation. You can write any equation in standard form. And here's what standard form looks like. ax plus by equals c. ax plus by equals c. Where a, b, and c are integers. Okay, so no fractions, no decimals. You want those to be integers. And a must be positive. So the coefficient of x you want to be positive. Okay? So here's an example of an equation that's in standard form. 3x minus 2y equal a negative 6. That's an equation in standard form. So notice that a, b, and c are integers. The coefficient of x is 3. That's an integer. It's also positive. All right, it needs to be positive. The coefficient of y is a negative 2. That's an integer. And the constant c is an integer as well. All right, so that's an example of what it's going to look like written in standard form. Okay? All right, now, so when we get to those problems, you're going to have fractions involved, so we're going to have to clear the fractions to get it in standard form. But that's something new. That was this idea was not listed in any of your previous lessons. It's also, depending on the textbook, some textbooks talk about writing the equation in standard form into this form, some don't. So just be aware that your textbook may have you write the equation of a line in standard form. And so those are examples we're going to look at in this lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to look at how do I write something in standard form. Okay? So that's going to be our focus today. So I'm going to go back up here. So we're going to talk about writing equations of lines, and we're going to put in both slope-intercept form, and standard form. So that's going to be the focus. So in the previous lesson, we looked at slope-intercept form and point-slope form. So if you remember this one in the previous lesson, point-slope form and slope-intercept form. So this time we'll look at slope-intercept form and standard form. It's not a difficult idea. It's fairly simple to deal with. All right, so let's look at the next idea you need to remember. So the next thing you need to remember in order to be successful in this lesson is this. You got to remember that two lines that are parallel have the same slope. So you need to know that parallel lines have same slope. Parallel lines have the same slope. Okay? You also need to know that perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals of each other. Okay? So basically if you have two lines that are perpendicular and you take their slopes and you were to multiply them, you would get a -1. Always. So two lines that are perpendicular, their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. So in previous lessons, you saw that. So for example, we saw that in this case, in a previous lesson, when we drew these two parallel lines, the slope of this line is -3. The slope of this line is also -3. So parallel lines have the same slope. Okay. We also saw that for perpendicular lines, and an example would be this right here. Well, let me get a different one. So an example would be, let's say this one. So these two lines are perpendicular. Notice that this line right here, the equation is in slope-intercept form, so that slope is -3/5. And so remember, the line falls, the slope is negative. And over here, you weren't given the equation, but you were given 2 points on the line, so we used the slope formula, and so notice the slope is +5/3. So -3/5 and +5/3 are negative reciprocals of each other. And notice that those two lines, they're perpendicular, meaning that they intersect and form a right angle. Okay? So those are the things you need to know in order to succeed with this lesson. So it's not a difficult idea. Very simple. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to look at these 4 problems right here. These 4 problems. And so in those problems, number 1 says you want to write the equation of a line that passes through this point and is parallel to this line. And there are 2 things you want to do with each of those problems, and same A and B for each one. You want to write the equation in slope-intercept form, and you also want to write it in standard form. So ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are integers and a is positive. Okay? And you do that for each of these 4 situations. All right, so let's look at the first one, number 1. Very simple idea. You may need to go back, though, and review some previous lessons that we did with this, with the equations of lines. Okay, so number 1. You're told that you want to find the equation of a line that passes through. So this is the equation I'm interested in. I'm interested in this. I'm interested in this equation. So that's the way I would think about this. I'm interested. I would in my mind think I'm interested in an equation. All right. So if I'm interested in an equation, in writing an equation, I need to know 2 things. I need to know a point, and I do. The point is 8,3. And I need to know the slope of that line that I'm interested in. Okay, so I need to know the slope. All right, now nowhere in there does it tell you what the slope of that line is, but it does tell you that it is parallel to this line. Okay, so you know this. This is what you know. You know that the line I'm interested in is parallel to this line here, y equals 1/5 x plus 2. And so notice that this equation is in slope-intercept form, right? So slope-intercept form. So if it's in slope-intercept form, then I know right away what the slope of this line is right here. So the slope is 1/5. So m equals 1/5. Now what that means then is that since this line and this line are parallel, they have the same slope. So the two lines have the same slope. Okay? So what that also means then is that if this line has slope 1/5, then the line I'm interested in also has slope 1/5. And now I know the two pieces of information I need. So remember, in order to use point slope form, you have to know a point on the line and the slope of that line, and I do now. I know a point of that line, and now I know the slope. Okay? So now we can use point slope form. So using point slope form, I get this. Y minus, remember y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. So y minus, now it helps if you denote this. So what I would do is I would label the point again. I would write the point again, the ordered pair, and I would label this as x1, y1. So y minus y1 equals the slope, which is 1/5, times x minus x1. Oops, sorry, and x1 is 8, excuse me. Okay, so x minus 8. Now that's point slope form, right? But they want you to write this, remember the directions said, write it in slope-intercept form. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write this in slope-intercept form. So now write in slope-intercept form. Okay, so I get y by itself. So first of all, I'm going to distribute. So I get y minus 3 equals 1/5 times x is 1/5 x. 1/5 times a negative 8 is a negative 8/5. And then finally, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And so when I combine like terms, I get y equals 1/5 x. Now you need to determine what negative 8/5 plus 3 is. So use your calculator. So negative 8/5. So negative 8/5, 8 divided by 5, plus 3 equal, and you get 1.4, which is 1 4/10. But you want to write this as an improper fraction. So you may remember this. 1.4, remember, is 1 4/10, right? Which reducing the 4/10 becomes 1 2/5. And then writing this, don't leave it like a mixed number. Write it as an improper fraction. So that will be 5 times 1 is 5 plus 2 is 7. So that becomes 7/5. You could have also used your calculator. So notice you could have said second. You remember that fraction to decimal function right here? So press that, okay? And then press equal, and you get 1 2/5, which is what we had here. But you got to convert that back to an improper fraction. So this becomes plus 7/5. All right, plus 7/5. Now, you know, if you wrote it as 1 2/5, really there's nothing wrong with that, but they did want you, or they do want you to write these as fractions. It's preferably written as fractions, but that's okay if you write it like this. Or you could have said y equals 1/5 x plus 1 2/5. Nothing's wrong with that, to be honest with you, but we prefer this. Okay? All right, now, so that is in right here. That's in slope-intercept form. Now the reason why this is preferable, okay, the reason why this would be preferable is because now we want to do part B. Okay, so listen carefully. Now let's talk about part B. So that's the answer. That's the answer for part A. That's our answer for part A. So that's slope-intercept form. Okay, now let's talk about part B. Okay, now part B. So you want to get this in in standard form. So that's where you bring all the variables to one side, clear the fractions, and then make sure that a, which is a coefficient of x, is positive. All right, what I would do first is this. I would go ahead and clear the fractions. That's why it's preferable to leave it as fractions and not mixed numbers. What's the least common denominator? 5, right? And you learned in previous courses, and even at the beginning of this course, you reviewed how to clear your fractions. So the LCD is 5. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5. That's your LCD. So basically you're going to say 5 times y equals, and then 5 times the other side, 1/5 x plus 7/5, right? Okay? And then, remember, you multiply both sides by the LCD. Multiply both sides by the LCD. Okay? And so if I distribute, I get this. 5y equal 5 times 1/5 x is x. 5 times 7/5, the 5's divide out, you're left with 7, right? And now, listen carefully, and now I'm going to bring, since the constant's on this side, I'm going to bring the variable to the other side. Now be careful, okay? Listen carefully. Listen carefully. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides. So I get negative x plus 5y equal 7, okay? Now remember, standard form says this. Standard form says you want to write as some integer times x plus some integer times y equals constant. Okay? I am almost there. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm almost there. I have x listed first, I have the term y listed second, and I have my constant on the other side. But the problem is that x must have what kind of coefficient? Positive. And all you do then, mathematically, what you would then do is you would multiply both sides by -1. So to make a positive, multiply both sides by -1. Because remember, what you do one side, you do the other. So that's mathematically okay to do. So you're going to say -1 times negative x plus 5y equal -1 times 7. And then distribute, and you're done. -1 times x is a positive x. -1 times 5y is a negative 5y equal -7. And there's your answer in standard form. So that's the answer for part B. Okay? All right, so let's do the next one. Let's do the next one. So that's number 1. So number 2. So number 2, you have this situation now. You want to write the equation. The point it goes through now is -5, 6, but this time it's perpendicular to this line. The previous one was parallel. All right, now remember, if you're going to write an equation of a line, if you are going to write an equation of a line, you want to use point-slope form. Okay? You want to use point-slope form. And in order to use point-slope form, you have to know a point on that line, and you have to know the slope of that line. Well, right away, I know a point on that line, -5, 6. Okay, so -5, 6, I know this. I know that -5, 6 is a point on the line I'm interested in. Is a point on the line. Okay, that I'm interested in. Now I've got to find the slope. The slope is blank, right? Okay, so you know this. You also know, we know that the line I'm interested in, which is this line right here, the line I'm interested in is perpendicular. I'm going to use a symbol for perpendicular. So it's perpendicular to this line. And this equation is in slope-intercept form. So that's slope-intercept form, right? So if it's in slope-intercept form, then the slope of that line is a coefficient of x. So the slope of this line right here, so the slope of this line is negative 3/7. So now I know the slope of that line, right? I know the slope of that line right here. So if the slope of this line is negative 3/7 and these two lines are perpendicular, then the slope of that line is the negative reciprocal of this. So this is negative 3/7 and this is going to be a positive, and then take the reciprocal, 7/3. So that's the slope of that line. Okay? All right, so now I know my two pieces of information, so now I can go to point slope form. All right, point slope form. And point slope form says this: y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. And you know the point of that line. A point on that line is negative 5, 6, right? So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it right here, and I'm going to label it x1, y1. Good idea to label these. And I know the slope now, the slope of the line I'm interested in. Now be careful, you need to use this one, not this one, okay? This one, 7/3. So y minus y1, which is 6, equals the slope, which is 7/3, times x minus x1, which is negative 5. You learned in previous lessons that you need to rewrite this. X subtract the negative 5 means x plus 5. That's important that you write it like this, x plus 5. So that's y minus 6 equals 7/3 times x plus 5. Now that's point slope form, right? Okay, but I want to eventually get it in what form? Slope-intercept form. So now let's write this in slope-intercept form. Remember, this is point slope form. That's point slope form. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to transform this to slope-intercept form. Okay, all right, let's do that. So I'm going to distribute the 7/3. And when I do that, I get y minus 6 equals 7/3 times x is 7/3 x, plus 7/3 times 5. 7 times 5, remember that's 5 over 1. So 7 times 5 is 35. 3 times 1 is 3. So that's 35 divided by 3. Okay? And then I'm going to add 6 to both sides. Add 6 to both sides, combine like terms. I get y equals 7/3 x plus, all right, 35/3 plus 6. So 35/3 plus 6. So use your calculator if you need to. 35/3 plus 6. So 35 divided by 3 plus 6 equals, and you get this. So 17.66666. Now, all of you know what this is as a mixed number. That's 17 and 2/3, right? That's what that is, 17 and 2/3. So that's 17 and 2/3. Now, hopefully you saw that, but if you didn't, then you would say second PRB, press equal, and you get 17 and 2/3. But you want to rewrite this back as a mixed number. I'm sorry, as an improper fraction. So 17 times 3 plus 2, and you get 53 divided by 3. All right, so we put that here, 53 divided by 3. Okay? All right. Now, so that is your answer for part A. So that is part A. That's your answer for part A. That's the answer for this right here. So that's your slope-intercept form. Okay? Now, what I want to do next is this. So what I want to do now is also I want to write it in standard form, ax plus by equals c. All right? So I'm going to do it just like we did before. We got to find the LCD, so we're going to clear the fractions. Okay, we're going to clear the fractions. So now we're looking at part B. So now this is going to be the process right here for writing in standard form. Now we're going to write in standard form. Okay, so I'm going to clear the fractions. So let me go ahead and rewrite this over. All right, so multiply both sides by 3. That's your LCD. Both sides. Remember, this is the equation, so what you do to one side, you have to do to the other, right? So I get 3y equals, I'm going to distribute the 3. It's 3 times 7 thirds. 3 times 7 thirds is 7x, right? 7x. So remember, 3 over 1 times 7 thirds. So that's 21 over 3, which is 7. You could also reduce. 3 over 1 times 7 thirds reduced. 1 times 7 is 7, right? Okay. So 7x, and then the same thing here. 3 times 53 thirds is 53. Okay? Now remember, you want to write in standard form. Standard form's this: ax plus by equals c. That's standard form. So I got to bring all the variables to one side, and let's put x first. So when I do that, though, you see how I have a positive 7x on this side? When I transpose it to the other side, it becomes a negative 7x. Because basically what you're doing is you're subtracting 7x from both sides. And so I get a negative 7x plus 3y equals, this is 0, 53. And just like the previous problem, remember, I want the coefficient of x to be what kind of number? Remember, you want the coefficient of x to be positive. You want a to be positive. Greater than 0 means positive. So all I do to make this a positive 7x is multiply both sides by negative 1. So to make a positive, multiply both sides by negative 1. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to rewrite this over. And I'm going to say times negative 1 times negative 1. And so when I distribute, my final answer then is negative 1 times negative 7x is 7x. Negative 1 times the positive 3y is a negative 3y equal, and this is a negative 53. So that's your answer for part B. So that's the answer. That's standard form. Okay? All right, let's look at number 3. So number 3, let's see what we have here. Okay, so number 3. So 3, same information. You want to do A and B, except this time your point, the line you're interested in goes to this point, and it's perpendicular to this line. Now, what's the difference between, let's say, this one and this one? Because I'm still using the word perpendicular. What's the difference? Look at the lines. This was already in what form? Slope-intercept form. This is in standard form, right? So if I want to find the slope of this line, I gotta write it in slope-intercept form. So I gotta solve for y. Okay. All right. So let's look at number 3. So here's what you got to do. So in your mind, you're thinking this. All right. I want to find the equation of that line. So here's the line I'm interested in. I'm interested in this line. I'm interested in the equation of this line. And in order to write the equation of the line I'm interested in, remember we're going to use point-slope form. And in order to use point-slope form, I've got to know a point on that line and the slope of that line. Well, I know the point on that line. What's the point on that line? Well, you're told it passes through the point, the ordered pair 2, negative 3. Okay, so I know a point on that line. So we know this. So the point is 2, negative 3. Now all I got to do now is find the slope. So we need the slope. That's what we got to find, right? Okay. So that's what I must know. I must know these two things. All right. Well, they don't come out and say what the slope of this line is, but they do tell you this. We know that the line I'm interested in is perpendicular to this line here, 3x plus y equal 4. So if I can find the slope of this line, then I know the slope of that line. All right, so let's go ahead and find the slope of this line. So this is not in slope-intercept form, so we need to get in slope-intercept form. So we're going to get y by itself. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I get y equals negative 3x plus 4. You agree that's what this is? So now this is in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. So now the slope of this line is the coefficient of x, which is negative 3. All right, now, So I know the slope of this line right here is -3. So what's the slope of the line I'm interested in? Remember, they're perpendicular. So this line is perpendicular to this line, and it has this slope. So if this slope is negative, then this slope has to be what? Positive. And then the reciprocal. So what's the reciprocal of -3? The negative reciprocal. So the reciprocal, if I cover this negative right now, what's the reciprocal of 3? 1/3, right? So this will be a positive 1/3. So this is negative, this is positive, and just take the reciprocal of that absolute value right here. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. So the reciprocal of 3 is 1/3. So there's your slope. Okay, so now we're going to go to point slope form. Now we're going to use point slope form. Okay, so y minus y1 equals the slope times x minus x1. So I know the point. The point I know is 2, -3. I'm going to label this as x1, y1, and now I know the slope is 1/3. So I'm going to substitute. So I'm going to get y minus a -3 equals the slope, which is 1/3, times x minus 2. Now remember, don't leave it as y minus a -3. You need to remember that that's y plus 3. Okay, so you got to rewrite this. Equals 1/3 times x minus 2. Now remember, this is point slope form, right? Point slope form. So that's the equation of the line in point slope form. But part A says, though, I want to write it in slope-intercept form. So now we got to rewrite this. So the next process then is to write in slope-intercept form. Okay, so slope-intercept form. So y equals mx plus b. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to clear the fraction. I'm going to distribute the 1/3. So I get y plus 3 equals 1/3 x minus, and 1/3 times a -2 is a -2/3. Okay? And then we got to get y by itself, so we subtract 3 from both sides. And so the 3's right here, 3 and -3 is 0, so I get y equals 1/3 x, 1/3 x. All right, now be careful here. So don't say 2/3 minus 3, because that's a -2/3. Okay, so be careful. So that's a -2/3. So what you're saying is you're adding a -2/3 and a -3. That's what you're adding. Okay? So you're adding these two constants, -2/3 and a -3. All right, so here's what we get. So negative 2 divided by 3 plus a -3 equals this. Now you all know that 0.6666 is 2/3. So this is going to be -3 and 2/3, right? And if you didn't know that, use your calculator. So second PRB to get fraction to decimal, decimal to fraction, and press equal, and you get -3 and 2/3. But you want to rewrite this back as a improper fraction. So 3 times 3 is 9, 9 plus 2 is 11, so it becomes -11/3. Okay? So I get 1/3 x minus 11/3. So you had to be careful here. Some of you would have made a mistake right here, so you got to be careful. Okay, and we're almost done. So that's the answer for part A. So that's the answer in slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form. Okay. Now we want to write this in a standard form. So now we're going to write in standard form. So now we need to write this in standard form. So I need to go to part B now. So write in standard form. Remember, standard form is ax plus by equals c, and those are a, b, and c are integers, and a must be positive. Okay? So let's clear the fractions. So the LCD is 3. The denominators are 3, so the LCD is 3. So let me go ahead and rewrite this over. So y equals 1/3 x minus 11/3. And now I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. Just like this. And so I get 3y equal. Now I'm going to distribute the 3. So 3 times 1/3 x is just x. 3 times a -11/3 is just minus 11, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm bring all the variables once. I'm going to write x first. I'm going to subtract x from both sides. And so I get -x plus 3y equal -11. And then remember, This is not quite in standard form because the coefficient of x is not positive. So what I'm going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by -1. Okay, so multiply both sides by -1 to get a to be positive. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. And I'm going to say times a -1 times -1. So if I distribute, a -1 times a negative x is a positive x. A -1 times a -1 times a positive 3y is a negative 3y, equal a -11 times a -1 is a positive 11. And that's your answer for part B. So that is standard form. Okay? And then finally, number 4. So let's see what number 4 is. So number 4 says this. So same thing, except this time it's parallel, and your equation is in standard form. So you got to convert this back to slope-intercept form to find the slope. Okay? All right, so let's look at number 4. So number 4, so remember, what you need to do is think of this. The line I'm interested in. I'm interested in the line, in the equation of a line. Okay, now if I'm interested in writing the equation of a line, then I need to know the point on that line. I need to know a point on the line. These are the two things I need to know. I need to know a point on that line, and I need to know the slope. Well, do I know a point on that line that I'm interested in? Yes, you do. It goes to this point, so 6, -7. The problem, though, is you're not told exactly what that slope of that line is, but you are told that it's parallel to this line. Okay, so we know this. We know that the line I'm interested in is parallel, I'm going to use the symbol for parallel, is parallel to 3x minus 5y equal 2. Okay? And so I need to find the slope of this line. So if I'm going to find the slope of this line, I need to convert this to slope-intercept form. Okay, so if I can find the slope of this line, then I know the slope of that line. They're parallel, so the slopes are equal. So let's go ahead and write this in slope-intercept form. So convert to slope-intercept form. Okay, so I get, what I'm going to do is well, it's okay. Let's just subtract 3x. That's probably what some of you would do, and I need to talk about this anyway. So you can subtract 3x and combine like terms. This is 0. So I get negative 5y. Be careful. That's not 5y. That's negative 5y. So we need to be careful. Equals, and let's put the x term first. That's negative 3x plus 2. Okay? Then I'm going to go ahead and write this over. Then I'm going to divide both sides by -5, just like this. Okay? Divide by -5. And simplifying, -5 divided by -5 is 1. 1 times y is y. And remember, you're going to write this as two fractions. So that becomes a negative 3x divided by -5 plus 2 divided by -5. But you want to rewrite this better. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay, you have to do that. So you have to say 3/5 x. You have to say a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So you have to say -2/5. All right? So that is right here the slope-intercept form of this line. So now the slope of this line right here is 3/5. I don't care what the y-intercept is. That's not needed in this problem at all. All right, so the slope is 3/5. So that means that if the slope of this line is 3/5, then the slope of this line also has to be what? 3/5, because they are parallel. So the slope of that line also has to be 3/5. Okay? So now I know what I need. So now I'm going to go directly to point-slope form. So now we're going to go to point-slope form. So let's write in point-slope form. Okay, so remember, These are the two things I know. I know the point is 6, -7, and I know the slope is 3/5. So here's my x1, this is my x2. So I get y minus y1, which is -7, equals the slope, which is 3/5, times x minus x1, which is 6. But just like we talked about earlier, you need to rewrite this. Don't leave it like this. You don't want to do this. You want to make sure you know that y subtracted -7 means y plus 7. So y plus 7 equals 3/5 times x minus 6. So that is point-slope form of the equation I'm interested in. So this right here, is point-slope form, is the equation of this line. But that's not what I want to end up with. I want to end up with an equation in slope-intercept form. So what I have to do now is take this line that's in point-slope form and convert it to slope-intercept form. So now we're going to write this in slope-intercept form, which remember is y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to distribute. So let me go ahead and rewrite this over. Well, that's fine. So we're going to distribute this. So I get y plus 7 equals 3/5 x. Now 3/5 times a -6, 3 times 6 is 18. So that'll be a minus 18 over 5. Okay. Now subtracting 7 from both sides and combining like terms, I get y equals 3/5 x. All right, now let's go ahead and use a calculator with this. So you got to be careful, just like we talked about earlier. You're adding these two numbers, these two constants. So you're adding a -18/5, not a +18/5. You got to be careful. That's a -18/5 to a -7. That's what you're doing. So in our calculator, you're going to say -18 divided by 5, -18 divided by 5, plus a -7 equal -10.6, which we know is -10 and 6/10, right? Which reduced, 6/10 reduced, so that's -10 and 3/5. Okay. Now, if you didn't know that, use your calculator. So second fraction decimal equal -10 and 3/5. But you want to convert this back to an improper fraction. So 10 times 5 is 50. 50 plus 3 is 53. So this becomes a -53/5. So that's what this becomes, minus 53/5. So that is the answer to part A. So that's the answer to part A. So we get, so that's slope-intercept form. All right. And now we want to convert this back to, so for part B, we need to write this in standard form. So we're going to write in standard form. All right, and so in standard form, I get ax plus by equals c, when you want a to be positive. All right, so I'm going to clear the fractions. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. And so the LCD is 3. I'm sorry, the LCD is 5, excuse me. The LCD is 5, so multiply both sides by 5, just like this. So I get 5y, and then we distribute. 5 times 3/5 x is 3x. 5 times a -53/5 is a -53. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides, just like this. And then I'm going to get -3x plus 5y equal -53. Now remember though, that's not standard form because you need the coefficient of x to be positive. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by -1. And so you can skip. Remember in the previous 3 problems we actually said multiply by -1, but in your mind, multiply by -1. All right, both sides by -1. Multiply both sides by -1. So -1 times 3x is a positive 3x. -1 times a positive 5y is a -5y. And then -1 times a -53 is a positive 53. Now I did that because I was running out of room, but you can do that. So that's your answer in standard form. Okay, so that's the answer to part B. Now, notice that and I don't want you to get to misinterpret this. So when we wrote this in standard form, okay, you notice that in problem 4, in problem 3, see where it says multiply both sides by -1? In problem 2, we did the same thing, multiply by -1, and in problem 1. I don't want you to think that you're always going to do that. All right, you're always going to do that. That's not always the case. So let me just kind of do one more just to show you that that's not always going to happen. Okay, so let me just do this. Okay, so let's look at number 5. So I went ahead and made up a problem for number 5 just to show you that in that last part, because in all the problems we did, remember we had to say multiply by -1. That's not always going to happen. So in the examples we did, it did. But let me just show you that that's not always going to be the case. So don't think it is. So let's look at this problem here, number 5. So you want to write the equation of a line that contains this point and is perpendicular to the line that has this equation. Okay. So again, in order to do this, we need to remind ourselves that the line I'm interested in, has this information. Okay, so I need to know two things. I need to know, because remember we want to use point slope form, so I need to know a point of that line, which I do, -2, -5. So the point of that line is -2, -5. And I need to know the slope. Okay, now they don't come out and tell you what the slope is, but they do tell you that this line that I'm interested in is perpendicular to the line that has this equation. Okay, so I know this. I know that the line I'm interested in is perpendicular to the line that has this equation. So 2x minus 3y equal -6. So if I could find the slope of this line, then I now know the slope of that line because they're perpendicular. Okay, so let's go ahead and write this in slope-intercept form. So let's put this in slope-intercept form. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides. And so I get a -3y. This is 0. So a -3y equals -2x minus 6. All right, so let me divide. Remember, we got to get y by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by -3, just like this. What you do one side, you do the other. And so I get the -3's divide out, so you get a 1. 1 times y is y, equal. And remember, you're going to write this as two separate fractions. Okay, so I'm going to get -2x divided by -3 minus 6 divided by -3. But you got to rewrite this because you are expected to know that a negative divided by negative is a positive. So you have to rewrite this as 2/3 x, and then a negative divided by negative is a positive. 6 divided by 3 is 2 plus 2. Okay, so this is the slope-intercept form of this equation here. So the slope of this line is 2/3, right? Okay, so I know the slope of that line. So now I know the slope of this line because the line I'm interested in is perpendicular to this line. And this line has slope 2/3. So therefore, the slope of this line then is going to be a -3/2. Because remember, perpendicular lines, the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. So -3/2. Okay? So now I know everything I need to know. So I'm going to go now to point slope form. So from here now, you're going to go to point slope form. So now use point slope form. Okay, so point slope form. So remember we know this. We know the point is -2, -5. So there's my x1, y1. And we know the slope is -3/2. Okay, leave it as a fraction. Don't write as a decimal. So y minus y1, which is negative 5, equals the slope, which is negative 3/2, times x minus x1, which is negative 2. But remember, you want to rewrite y minus negative 5 and x minus negative 2. So you want to say y plus 5 equals negative 3/2 times x plus 2. So this is point slope form of the equation I'm interested in. Okay, so that's point slope form of the equation I'm interested in. But the direction set in part A was you got to go a little bit further. You got to write this back in slope-intercept form. Okay, we can do that. Solve for y. So I got to write this back in slope-intercept form. So write in slope-intercept form. All right, so we can distribute first. So you got y plus 5 equals a negative 3/2 times x is a negative 3/2 x. And then a negative 3/2 times a positive 2. I'm hoping you see this. A negative 3/2 times a positive 2. So remember, that's negative 6 divided by 2, which is negative 3, right? Or you could have said this, negative 3/2 times a positive 2. The 2's divide out, and so you get negative 3 times 1 is a negative 3. All right, so that's minus 3. And then we subtract 5, and we don't need our calculator this time, because when I combine like terms, I get y equals negative 3/2 x, and a negative 3 and a negative 5 is a negative 8. So that is the answer for part A. So the equation of our line is this. So that's slope-intercept form. All right, now we got to put this back in part B now. We want to write this now in standard form. Okay, so now we're going to write in standard form. All right, so we're going to clear the fraction. The LCD is 2. LCD is 2. So I'm going to rewrite this over. Y equals negative 3/2 x minus 8. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2, just like this. So I get 2y equals 2 times distribute. 2 times negative 3/2 x is a negative 3x. 2 times a negative 8 is a negative 16. And all I do is add 3x to both sides, just like this. Because remember, you want to put it in standard form. Standard form is ax plus by equals c. So all the variables one side, your constant on the other side. So I get 3x plus 2y. This is 0 when I combine those, equal negative 16. And I want you to notice I'm done because what's the coefficient of x? It is positive, so you're done. So we did not have to, like we did in all the other problems, we did not have to multiply by negative 1. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, how to deal with these problems. And it's not that difficult, very simple. In all our cases, we had to use this information. We had to know point slope form, we had to know slope-intercept form, we had to know what standard form meant, and we had to know that parallel lines have the same slope, perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals of each other. Okay? All right, so that's going to be the end of this lesson.